Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Corona Land and the attempt to still get some content in. And I am very, very pleased to say that we're going to be talking some Derby County. We're going to do a nice deep dive on a pretty eventful year for the Rams this past year going back to last March. And we have on the other end of Skype after a strenuous day of working from home. Justin Peach of the Second Tier podcast and Derby County supporter. Justin, are you alive? Have you washed your hands in the last 20 minutes? Have you touched your face and have you been to Tesco's?
Oh, following all the guidelines. Following all the guidelines. Yes, still alive, still free of any contact from the outside world, and yeah, constantly washing hands.
If this was a horror movie, though, we would both already have it and not know, and we're being all blasé about it, and then in 10 days' time, we realise that everybody in the world has got it. But there we go. If that's the case, we better get this podcast done then.
Yeah, get it out soon as.
Let's talk some Derby County, and I mean, you and I have sort of gone back and forth
Hmm.
before on certain stuff, and I thought, well, what should we talk about? And then when I went back and looked, it's been quite the sort of ridiculous year, so to say. There's
Yes.
there's a
Yeah.
few interesting signposts, but I sort of looked for a start point, and I went back into March last year and looked at the
Hmm.
results and thought, where can we pick this story up before
Yeah.
the incredible playoff campaign? And I landed on the 2nd of March 2019. Jack Grealish returns for Aston Villa, and Derby go down 4-0 at Villa Park. Villa are about to go on their absurd 10-game
Yeah.
winning streak.
Yeah.
It's a third straight defeat for Derby. There's 12 games to go, just on the edges of the playoffs. But was there a bit of a sense before we get to the playoffs that this was going to nosedive a little bit and it had peaked under Lampard and things were just going to fizzle out?
I guess it depends who you ask. From my perspective, it was literally that weekend I booked my flights to Prague for the week of the playoff for the bank holiday playoff final.
Okay.
Um, much to I was that confident that we weren't going to make it because the performance was terrible. Obviously, you mentioned we lost 3 games on the trot. The perception and thoughts around any success that season had completely shifted. And obviously spent all that money on flights and whatnot and accommodation to Prague with my missus, and obviously that got turned on its head. But as you say, I guess it depends who you ask. There are always optimistic Derby supporters, supporters in any club. But for those that are on my wavelength, I think it was at that point where we all thought, nah, maybe not this year.
They sort of flash the old table up and you forget where Middlesbrough are at this point,
Mhm.
and they're going to have
Yeah,
like a horrible 6-game lose streak, and
yeah,
Villa are like 11th, and I mean a 10-game win streak will get you in the top two most seasons, so just
yeah,
incredible
absolutely.
there. The results after that pick up a little bit. There's a win and 2 draws. Then Mason Mount comes back, which kind of changes everything, and you beat
Yeah,
Rotherham 6-1. We get to the end of Easter and Derby are back in sixth, but it's a horrible last 3 games. It's real key game against Bristol City in eighth. Swansea away as well in the game in hand, and
mhm.
they've got the motivation. If they beat you, they're back up into playoffs.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then
yeah.
fourth place West Brom away in the last game. It even looks a difficult ask with 3 to go and two direct rivals for that sixth spot. Can you remember back to that Bristol City game being pivotal and the Swansea that last 3 game week?
Yeah, I think that the Swansea game was a rearranged fixture from because we played Brighton in the FA Cup, and I think it was rearranged from there. So it was almost shoehorned in. And at that point, you sort of think, is 3 games in that? Is 3 really important games? Is that going to be too much for the squad? Obviously, we'd had a few injury issues. Players were out of form. You're looking at Jack Marriott, obviously Mason Mount only just come back from injury. So you're going into their last 3 games, and they're against against sides in the top eight, top 10, top eight. And he's again, you think again from my perspective, he's sort of thinking got no chance here, no chance. It's not meant to be that easy as a Derby supporter. And then you pick up the win against Bristol City, and you think, hang on a minute, we've got a terrible record at Bristol City. We barely win there. We could do something there. And I think it was Tomori got injured in that game, and you see. We were put through the mill in those last three games. You're going back. You go to the West Brom game. West Brom equalise. You think it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
Strong West Brom team as well. They
Yeah,
didn't
yeah,
like
yeah,
Villa put the reserves out that weekend against Norwich.
yeah,
I looked back and that was a West Brom first team with all the big names in.
yeah. No, definitely. But they never really got going, and they were quite not lackluster, but they were more defensively minded than they had been under Darren Moore. And I think that played into our hands a bit. And the game that day, the supporters were absolutely tremendous. It was one of the best atmospheres for a long time, and I think that can carry you through. And as I say, those two away games against Bristol City and Swansea can sort of, as I say, just push you along, and the momentum built from there, I think.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, so key win against Bristol City. Avoid defeat at Swansea was the important thing, just to keep them at
Yeah,
arm's length, having put yourself back in the box seat there. So Derby take sixth place with 74 points, which is about par for sixth place.
yeah,
The run from that Villa game we mentioned was 6 wins, 5 draws, 1 defeat. So 23 points in the last 12 is promotion form.
mhm,
And it's going to be Leeds in the playoffs, who very good side, pipped by an
yeah,
even better side. And it was 4-1 at Pride Park, 2-0 the Spygate game. I was at that one,
mm,
and Leeds were absurdly good in that game.
yeah.
And remember, you're talking to an Ipswich fan here, so I know about being terrible in the playoffs. But Derby also are rubbish in the playoffs, aren't they? 7
Yeah,
appearances, 1 win, 3 times losing finalists, fourth appearance this in 6 seasons. So full of confidence, yes.
yeah, I think you nailed it. You're going into the game after two back-to-back defeats against Leeds, where we'd not been in those games at all. We were battered both times. And then there's our record in the playoffs post 2007. Is the playoff final against QPR, the semi-final against against Hull and Fulham. There's not a lot of confidence there, and I think especially the first game against Leeds, where we didn't look dangerous, but they didn't really get going to full gear either. So I think that gave us a lot of hope going into the second leg that we could nick something.
It was odd that first, because Leeds were kind of dominant, but in a keep you at arm's length way
Yeah,
rather than in a
yeah,
blow you away, which they'd done in the other games. Was my
mm,
kind of reaction to those games. But and it felt like a bit of a miss. I remember Nugent starting up front, and you think just put Marriott in to try and get in that massive gap between the
yeah.
centre. Felt a bit of a damp squib that first playoff leg, didn't it?
It was, and then there wasn't. You pretty much nailed it. There wasn't a lot going on in that game. The biggest thing other than Leeds getting the goal that happened was the penalty being reversed. Obviously, getting a penalty and then getting it
God, I forgot
reversed.
about that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
quite rightly. To be fair, I don't think it was a penalty. It was quite a soft one, but um, there wasn't a lot that happened. I think after it came to light that Mateus Click headbutted Tomori in the chest as well, um, which
Zidane style.
yeah, and Tomori just looked around at her. I feel like, have you seen that? And I think every Derby supporter expected a ban. Nothing came of it, but those two incidents were pretty much the highlight of the game. There's nothing, as you say, nothing really happened.
So off we go to this ridiculous second game, and I was at this one as well,
Yeah,
and like the
yeah,
whole of Leeds ground tour, I didn't get into. Literally, I've never been so stressed in my life. I was outside the ground until like the 9th minute.
yeah,
Fortunately, events didn't start transpiring until the 24th minute, where um, Stuart Dallas gives Leeds the lead in that. He'd taken Nugent out and put Mason Bennett in, presumably just, look, we're going to have some running power at
yeah.
least in this side, and try and get amongst
Mm,
them. I'll let you pick the story up, because here comes Jack Marriott. Ridiculous, to a goal right before half time and then right after half
Yeah.
time. Can you now sense at this point? I always remember Gary Neville when Torres scored that goal for Chelsea at Barcelona, and he was like, "Something's happening here. This is weird.
Yeah.
I can't
Yeah.
explain." Did you get that sense then at 2-2 that, hang on, this is going to go crazy now?
I think so. Yeah, I think going back to the Hull playoffs, where we were 3-0 down in the first leg, and then we get to the KC and we make it 2-0 within the first 20 minutes, and it never quite pushes over the line. We never quite got there. And then as soon as Marriott came on, he changed the game because he was doing something that none of the other Derby players were doing, and he was gambling on the second balls. Obviously, Mason Bennett went up for the header against, I think it was against Cooper, and then the ball got played back to Casilla. There was a bit of hesitation. Marriott nips in and scores, and then the game swung on that because I think if it's just a normal goal, if it's just a ball played through the middle of the defenders and it's a finish, I don't think the game would have swung our way. But because it was a mistake, you could sort of sense the what's the word I'm looking for?
Tension.
Tension, the nervousness, the supporters, the players, and I think Derby players sort of preyed on that.
They ate it up, didn't they? So,
Yeah.
Wilson puts the penalty in for 3-2 now. Then Dallas scores again, and we're headed for extra time. It's 3-3 on aggregate. Then it's a red card for Berardi, which was the 10th booking of the game. And I don't know about you, but I knew you were going to score after you. I just got this sense. I was high up in the
Yeah.
lead stand, and you can really see the team shape. And we're going to talk a lot about Richard Keogh in a little bit, but he did a really good job of pushing that
Yeah.
whole team forward. And I'm sitting there, and I promise I'm not lying about this. I'm like, Derby are going to score. This is going to happen here before full time. And just take me through this winning goal in this moment.
It was probably one of the best experiences I've had at a football game. It was only a playoff semi-final, and we lost the game. We lost the final in the end. But I don't think you can take anything. You can't take that away from Derby supporters. That moment where Marriott just lofts the ball over Casilla, and as you say, as soon as Keogh picks up the ball, you could see the space just open up for him. And it's like, well, hang on a minute, because he did that every game.
Yeah,
it wasn't new. He was so good at doing it, just carrying the ball. It was probably one of the best dribblers in the side. But yeah, and then he picks out Marriott with an inch perfect pass, and then Marriott he did that against Norwich in the last minute.
Yes, same goal. Yeah.
And you just sort of knew as soon as he's in that position, he's gonna loft it over Casilla. And it's whether or not he gets enough on it, and he did, thankfully. And I had no words at all to explain the euphoria. It was amazing.
It's incredible as well because presumably you're down in that dreadful stand at Leeds.
Yes,
I'm up the top.
yeah.
My experience of it was it's so bizarre because he goes through, the ball dinks over, and you know how the sound takes a while to travel.
Yeah.
So all I get is you see the ball dropping in, and just Leeds fans around me kind of collapsing, and then you see the away stand go crazy, and then just exodus and just despair in the other stand. It's very weird to be neutral at that moment.
I can imagine.
Yeah, not either celebrating or in despair, but incredible moment. I said when I did my review after the game, and I said, because you don't quite know the context there and then, but I said I think I've just seen a classic, and I'll now say it's one of the great. You say great games because it was just so mental, but one of the most mental games I've ever seen. Incredible. Villa, interesting you mentioned it, made hard work of their semi, but you said West Brom were negative. Well, again, I was at both of these playoff semis, and 5 across the back and 3 in front, and very negative. It's Villa and Derby in the final, and just weren't quite good enough, were they? I think Villa were just a bit ahead in terms of star power and never got close.
Yeah,
really.
It was a frustrating game because you see, not to disrespect any of the Derby players that played, but you sort of see the team sheet, and I think it was Bennett and Lawrence who started up front.
Yeah, it would have been unchanged, wouldn't it?
It was a bizarre lineup, and I just think it's the final. You have to put your best players, your best goal scorers, and Marriott, what he'd done um in the semi final against Leeds in that second leg, he needed to start. And because of how sort of forward thinking Villa were, I think there were gaps to exploit there. And him and Waghorn had just started to develop a nice little partnership. Um, yeah, and it was disappointing. But as you say, I don't think we ever really got going in that game.
Yeah, Lampard's not the first or last manager to mistrust Marriott, and
Yeah.
not that's kind of been a theme in his career. But I totally agree with you. It's like he came up with a tactic specifically for Bielsa, and then
Hmm.
felt that he had to
Yeah, they would
keep it
work
for the
it
next game.
again.
And my kind of view on Derby County of that season was that it was, bits of brilliance and Mount and Lawrence and Wilson
Hmm.
and this kind of high impact stuff that had got them through, and then they kind of went sort of tried to go toe to toe with a
Yeah.
sort of you know slow flowing Dean Smith side, and it totally played into Villa's hands.
No, definitely. We got absolutely trounced twice by Villa again, similar to the Leeds game. So I think it wasn't the home game against Villa. It was 0-0 up until the 70th minute, and then Balassi came on and absolutely battered us. And then obviously we're never in the 4-0 game. So going into this game, we thought things had changed drastically since that 4-0 defeat. Both not necessarily tactically, but there was a change in shape that helped us get the best out of the players in there. But sometimes I think Lampard overthought it. On occasion, I think being a not a rookie, well, yeah, a rookie manager, I think that sort of played into it a bit.
Before we talk about the real huge changes, can you just reflect on that 18-19 team? You kind of built around three really
Mhm.
excellent loans in Tamori Mount and Wilson. Always a good footballing team as well. It was always trying to sort of play through the thirds,
Yeah.
etc. How will that how will that Lampard year be remembered by Derby fans?
Um, I think because of the playoff semi-final against Leeds, though, it's a very happy memory. But for large portions of the season, we were quite not negative, but we didn't have enough punch to put us more comfortably in the playoffs. I think the players we had, we could have done a lot better. Um, Wilson being our top scorer with majority of his goals for the set pieces and goals from outside the area, it's been well highlighted that our ability to create clear cut chances was low. For me, it was a bit underwhelming. It could have been better, but I think because of that Leeds game, it's a very, very happy memory sort of season. But then again, the way it ended with Lampard leaving adds a bit more frustration, I think,
Well,
to Derby supporters.
let's talk about that. So, July the 4th, Lampard leaves for Chelsea, and he's one of their greatest players. It's
Mm,
interesting what you were saying about how the team was developing, because there was a big sense that, and I always think in Championship, particularly with the turnover, that year
yeah,
two is where
it's a
normally
big year.
the good
Yeah.
work is done. Is there an argument for him trying to develop himself more in the second tier, or was it literally, look, this has come up now, it may never come up again. I have to take it.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the Graham Shinnie signing. He signed in March or April, so you could see that Lampard was starting to shape up his side, and I think Shinnie would have been absolutely perfect for the way Lampard wanted to play. So I think he was certainly setting up for it. But the way things transpired for Sarri at Chelsea, it got sour very quickly, didn't it? I think they had some really poor results in the second half of the season. I know they ended up winning the Europa League, but players were falling out with him. There was the issue with not bringing through youngsters at Chelsea. He was forced into playing Hudson-Odoi, and then there was the transfer ban. I think it was a perfect time for Lampard to go from their perspective because expectations were low. He brought through good players at Derby, young players. So from their perspective, it was a good time. But from Derby's perspective, we felt we were building something under Lampard. And as you say, that second year is massive. You look at Bielsa of Leeds; they've kicked on another gear this year. Um, they're miles better than they were last year. So there is argument to be had that we could be in a much better position had Lampard stayed.
Interesting. One day later, presumably this was all done with contracts in mind, Philip Cocu comes in, and it looks, great player, handsome fella in a suit, kind of way more experienced than Lampard though.
Yeah.
Looks like a similar sort of appointment. What was your view when Cocu comes in?
I guess delight just because of his record as not only a manager but as a player as well. I think I grew up watching 2000s football, so having Philip Cocu around was absolutely magnificent. Even Lampard, I guess, but Cocu was a completely different player to Lampard. So having him come in, and as I say, his record at PSV was ridiculously good. I think there was that changing of the guard in terms of the dominance in the Eredivisie from Ajax to PSV, and the players that I think people forget, especially Derby fans, forgot some of the players that came through at PSV in the years that he was there. So there's a bit of short-sightedness this season with him, but from initial thoughts were, wow, we've got this international style standard manager, and he's our first foreign manager as well.
Really?
Yeah, wow. Yeah. They've always been English or Scottish. I think Tommy Docherty was Irish, but yeah, he's our first foreign manager. So there's that aspect as well.
Interesting. Let's talk about this squad, because there's this. There's always been this sense over the past few years that Derby would go and they would maybe overpay for proven championship players already in that age bracket where they're going to be good straight away, and then we know Tomori, Mount, and Wilson they're going to be off on their superstar careers anyway. Big clear out though: Bryson, Butterfield, Pearce, Blackman, Nugent, Johnson, Carson, Thorne. Only Luke Thomas brings in any kind of fee. There's no Vydra, Ince, or Hughes, Hendrick money. Was this clear out much needed, and did you start to get a bit of a sense of Mel Morris looking and thinking, right, they're now actually starting to really, Birmingham have taken the deduction? Do you kind of look at that and think, oh, the happy days of 5 million for this striker, 6 million for this midfielder are all gone, or did it actually need to be refreshed in that way?
It definitely needed to be refreshed, but there was murmurs of it the previous season. I think that's one of the main motivations just as to why Rowett left for Stoke, was because Mel Morris wasn't going to put as much money into signings. But then Lampard comes in and we spray money everywhere again. 9 million overall on Waghorn. I think that's what the potential fee could be. And again, same with Marriott. And so that caught us by surprise. And I think, again, going into last summer, we sort of thought, well, maybe he could spend a bit more again. But I know we did bring in Bielik, but he was probably the only player that we brought in for a big fee. But the clear out was needed. I think the only player that I was disappointed that we let go was Bradley Johnson, because of how good he was, and we didn't really have a midfielder like him at the club now. So that's probably the only disappointment in terms of player leaving.
Yeah. So you mentioned Bielik, which is a very different. A sort of younger, more modern-looking player, can play in either defence or midfield.
Yeah.
Shinnie looked like good business on a free, and there'd been a good link up with Aberdeen and some loans back and forth anyway, hadn't there?
Yeah.
It's just a bit of a sense when you look, and I know it's a bit unfair of me to do so, but sort of Clark, Patterson, and Dowell comparing to Maury, Mount, and Wilson. Dowell could have worked out, but evidently didn't. But after just one game week, here comes the big blockbuster signing, and Wayne Rooney is announced as to be coming in January as a player coach. Give me your thoughts on, am I being unfair about those loan signings in comparing, and just the Rooney deal and the kind of clever structuring of it with 32 Red?
I think the loan signings, we were very happy with Matt Clark. The numbers he posted in League One for Portsmouth were ridiculous.
Stop it! We gave him away. Okay, Adam Webster came, but yeah, ridiculous too.
Yeah.
Well, that's why my club's 10th in League One. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say a lot of players have come through Ipswich. If you look at Jack Marriott's another one.
Yeah.
Yeah, the number Matt Clark posted were ridiculous, and we were quite happy with that. A left-footed player as well. I don't think we had a left-footed centre half since I can't even remember. So that was a good signing. The Dowell one, it could have worked out, as you say. I quite liked him at Forest. I know it petered out for him, but I quite
Mm,
liked him at Forest, and I think didn't really hit the heights at Sheffield United as he did at Forest in terms of goals and assists, but he was quite useful
mm. Played
in that
left
in
wing
that
back
promotion run.
twice. Yeah,
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 and as he's got a cracking left foot, but you're going into a team where the expectation is you need to be Mason Mount. It's never going to be
you're
ideal.
right.
And
Yeah.
then Jamie Patterson was, I think it was like third choice signing. It's come out. We were linked with Scott Sinclair heavily and
Mm.
Haraguchi from Hanover, I think, in the Bundesliga. So yeah, they were very much well. Patterson mainly was a third, fourth choice signing, and then going on to Wayne Rooney. No words really. That it came out of the blue. I know we had Ashley Cole. That I thought that would be the best we could get in terms of England legends, but no, we signed arguably England's greatest player in the modern era. Yeah, unbelievable.
Yeah. Pretty unspectacular start, however, and I probably saw your first couple of games actually. One win in the first eight, five draws in
Hmm.
the bargain. Very much a sense of that Koku's team is going to be less fluid than
Yeah.
Lampard's and more kind of drilled, if you know what I mean.
Hmm.
Talk to me about the slow start, including the first half an hour where it looked like Tom Lawrence was going to rip the entire division to shreds, and the unlikely return of one Chris Martin back to the first 11.
Yeah, the Tom Lawrence first half an hour, as you say, against Huddersfield was
I
ridiculous,
was
and
there. It
that
was probably
yeah,
still the best half hour I've seen by any player this season.
the goals he scored as well were absolutely
It's
fantastic.
stupid, yeah.
Normally he laces things like he puts his foot for everything, but that I think it was the softly touched lob over the keeper was just yeah. Not seen that from him ever. So you think, oh, hang on a minute, we don't need Harry Wilson. We've got a Tom Lawrence. And then that came crashing down to earth quite quickly with his form started to dip as soon as that half an hour finished, I think. Um, and then, as you say, the first few games, it was very functional. It wasn't, as you say, it wasn't fluid. It was quite structured. And you sort of got to remember
Too
that
structured?
I guess so, yeah. But he's a, Koku's a Dutch football manager. Dutch football is very structured. You look at Louis van Gaal at Man United, it was very structured and functional, but it gets results. And it gets results in a nice way, not in an ugly way. Yeah, the football's still not terrible. It was terrible at that point. But it's you're starting to see the results now and the performances that they're putting through. Um, and we had some tough games in that first few fixtures, and I think that one of our downfalls perhaps was giving away stupid penalties and stupid goals. The goals that we conceded were mainly from individual mistakes right up until the Brentford game. Then it went downhill from there. But going on to Chris Martin, I was on a stag do that weekend, and we were 1-0 down. And
Is this the Leeds game?
yeah, the
Yeah.
Leeds game, we were 1-0 down, and at that point, you're just sort of thinking, you take in our current form, you take a 1-0 defeat against Leeds at their place. But then Chris Martin pops up out of the blue, and it was probably one of the happiest moments as a supporter is seeing Chris Martin back on a score sheet in the Derby shirt. It was perfect.
But we know that as a football fan, you're not allowed happiness because it's just
No, no.
not a thing. So Tuesday, September the 22nd, just incredible goings on here. The Derby
Mm,
squad go 10-pin bowling in Derby in the afternoon, and then off to the pub in a place called Quandon. I don't know whether you'd know where
yeah,
that is.
Quandon.
Sorry, if mispronounced it. Club captain Richard Keogh, along with Tom Lawrence and Mason Bennett, stay late for some adult beverages. Don't even need to say allegedly because they've both since been, and I'm talking about Lawrence and Bennett, both charged with drink driving after taking their cars home. Lawrence's car is involved in a crash. Keogh is in the back of Lawrence's car and sustains a terrible injury to his knee, and we won't say anything more. Bennett and Lawrence are fined 6 weeks' wages and given 80 hours community service, including rehabilitation and education classes. Keogh is apparently offered to do his rehabilitation on a muchly reduced wage, turns this down, and is promptly sacked. So,
Yeah.
pick the bones out of that then. Talk to me about the crime, the punishment, the differing punishment, because we should say that Bennett's now off with Gary Rowett
Mhm.
at Millwall, which is
Yeah.
probably, a good solution for him. But yeah, talk to me about the crime, the three guys involved, and the different punishments depending on their value to
Yeah.
the club.
Yeah, it was probably one of the most. I mean, Derby's history has been littered with weird goings on and controversies and whatnot. But this was probably one of the worst. And I don't think I'd experienced anything like it as a Derby supporter, having the players that you support involved in a stupid, avoidable crime. And I think as a supporter, I think you were, as a supporter, you're into your mindset. You're thinking, there's no way you should have done it, sacked them. And they shouldn't have done it, but do they deserve another chance?
And do we punish our own club financially for the? Do you know what I mean? There's been a lot of people very preachy about it, but by firing them, you know that whoever Neil Warnock's managing at the time is going to sign Tom Lawrence within a day of him being fired on a pay rise as well.
Yeah,
Do you know what I mean? So,
exactly.
Sorry, carry on.
The logic there, as you say, it makes sense as a club financially. Do you sack players and then risk them getting picked up by another club? I think I've said it many a times. Football at the moment is almost shameless. Like, there's been a lot of times where clubs have picked up players that have committed crimes previously, and morally, it's a murky area. And as a supporter, you sort of think, should I be behind this player? Should I encourage it? You're not encouraging the crime, but that's what I think you get what I mean. But it's I sort of understand why the club did what they did, but would that have happened in any other line of employment? I don't think so.
It's so unique, isn't it? Because that value that one person has. Just talk to me particularly about Keogh, because absolute stalwart and hundreds and 400 games. Am I right?
Along those lines, yeah.
Just a really club legend up until that point. Did they handle that in the correct way?
I personally think they didn't. I think you can't have one rule for one and then another rule for another person. In any walk of life, I don't think it's possible, especially not especially not in football. You're punishing two players based on the value of the contracts and their ability to play football, and then you're punishing another because he's been injured in this crash. I still don't. Yeah, as I say, I still don't think the club managed it particularly well. And I think that for me was one of the lowest points, even with the crashes. That was probably one of the lowest points, and almost Derby County being dragged through the mud for whatever reason. It was really disappointing time.
Just quickly, do you think we'll see Keogh maybe in League One or something, especially if the start of next season is deferred until maybe November or December time? Do you think we'll see him play again?
I'd hope so. I really do, because aside from this, he was a passionate player. I loved watching him because he was so unorthodox. It was, and he really grinded people up. Opposition fans hated him. He's one of those players
but they knew him. That was the thing. Yeah.
I'd be surprised if he got back playing. I hope he does. But another club legend Sean Barker suffered
Yeah, right. Yeah.
a terrible injury to his knee, and it took him 4 years to get back playing, and he had a bit more time on his side. So as I say, hopefully, he does get back to playing again because he's a good player and a good captain.
Interesting. Let's get back to the pitch then. So those first 8 games are followed by this peculiar run where you're basically top of the league form at home
Mm-hmm.
and bottom of the league form away. It's 5 consecutive home wins, but a draw and 4 defeats away. Why so good at home? And I know you're not a millionaire football manager, but why so good at home and so bad away?
It must have been confidence. I've never known anything like it for because it was literally even if we'd had some half decent results, we'd be in the playoffs away from home. I mean, we'd have been in the playoffs. It was bizarre, and I think even at home we weren't performing particularly great, but we were getting results. And then it obviously started to click. But the away form, I went to a few of the away games. I went to Brentford away, which was one of the most horrific. It could have been 6 or 7-0 to Brentford. And
They're not a good team to have a bad day against, are they?
exactly, yeah, they're clinical, they're quick, they're a pleasure to watch if you're a neutral or a Brentford fan. But if you're on the other side of it, it can be daunting. Yeah, it was bizarre. Even if we were just picking up draws, you'd have been happy because we were just giving silly goals away, penalties. The Reading game was horrendous. Again, I went to that one. I think Malone got sent off in the first 4 minutes for a push when the player was going to be smothered by Hamer in terms of the ball. It was just mistake after mistake after mistake. And I think it just came down to mentality and not attitude, but application, I guess.
So things are going to get worse, Justin, coming up to Rooney's arrival. 7 without a win, and on Boxing Day down to 18th in the table. However, from the game before Rooney's arrival, 5 wins in 7. So is this just results reflecting form and it catching it up as we do see it? Is it everyone's obviously going to look at this and say Rooney arrives, you start winning, go figure.
Mm.
Talk to me about the surge and also talk to me about the injury to Bielik, the expensive signing out for the season during that run as well.
Yeah, the form, as you say, it did start to pick up. Performances were picking up, but going to the Wigan game on Boxing Day, we were terrible all the way through that. That Wigan deserved the win, and then we got a fairly fortunate goal in the last minute. It felt like we were just dragging a broken leg behind us, just limping till we get to January 1st to get Wayne Rooney into the side. But going, I think it was the Barnsley game just before the new year.
Charlton first, and then Barnsley after the new
Yeah,
year.
Charlton first, and then we looked absolutely fantastic against Charlton. And obviously, from that point, it was Max Bird who came in against Wigan for Bielik, who looked like he was going to get sent off. And then Bird sort of made the place his own. He looked fantastic. Knight was sort of in and out the side at that point. And I think from there you sort of saw a fair bit of hope because of the performances, the style of play has started to come to fruition. And when you add Wayne Rooney into that, I think that gave everybody a boost.
Absolutely. So you think it's starting to get good, but we get to 16th of January and Derby are now charged with a breach of FFP rules, but this is pertaining, so it's not for their most recent sets of accounts. It's the 3 years leading up to June of 2018, and obviously they would have, by now they would have submitted the 2018-19. So it is a kind of deferred thing. At the centre of this is the £80 million sale of Pride Park and fixed asset player amortisation. And I think you know Kieran as well.
Mm-hmm.
At Price of Football, none of us understand this. Just tweet him. He will answer, I promise. So Derby have since fired back saying, as a matter of law, the EFL is not entitled to bring either of the charges, having previously agreed to all of the arrangements surrounding the stadium sale and never having raised the issue of player amortisation before, the club shall argue that the very bringing of these charges is in itself unlawful. So it's kind of, we might be guilty, but you can't
Yeah.
do that. What an absolute mess. I mean, quickly on the stadium. I think Birmingham have stitched you up good and proper now, just putting theirs in at a value of 23, the
Yeah.
lowest possible value. With the amortisation, again, it's a difficult one to understand. It's how you value players on a balance sheet
Yeah.
and their depreciation, and can you?
Yeah.
It's a very difficult one. How do you
Yeah.
see this going? Bearing in mind, Birmingham were given a point back for cooperating, and Derby are going full legal challenging this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised we're going in with 2 feet. Mel Morris, in any of the statements over the last sort of 12 months, you could sort of sense that tone, especially against the EFL, and Steve Gibson and whoever else disagrees with Mel Morris and Derby County. The stadium sale, firstly, is it was a bizarre situation because I think that the accounts came in for last, well, they came in last season, and it's like £14.5 million profit. What? How? And then you sort of read into the details. Like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Fair enough. You've sold a stadium, right? And then obviously from
which
there,
is legal within the rules. It's fine to do
yeah,
that.
yeah, exactly. And obviously everything was approved by the EFL, and then obviously there's been a change of guard at the EFL. The new guard aren't a fan of it, I imagine. And rightly so. I think the club needs this to bring it back down to earth. I think there has been cost cutting, but it definitely needs this, as I say, to bring it back down to earth because we've overspent. We've been very creative with our accounting, and I think we should start to push ourselves along the lines of good recruitment, and just being a modern football club in that sense. Because there are plenty in the league now that are pushing that sort of ethos, and they're successful because of it. Brentford aren't there because they've sold their stadium for 80 million. They're there because of good recruitment. They're selling players on for high value costs and whatnot. And I think that's where the route that Derby needs to go. And I think that's where they are going. But as you say, the first they've got to get around the EFL charge.
Going to be an interesting time, that one. Just to kind of give the figures, I think was Hillsborough 50 million in the sack,
Yeah,
and I think Reading and Villa lower than that as well. So it's the issue with it not stacking up with other valuations that they've
but
accepted.
we're putting a roof on it, so it's fine.
So yeah, I just have this sense that Derby and Sheffield Wednesday, they were the two teams, like you say, that were fighting against the parachute teams. That the last kind of stand of no, we can sign Gary Hooper for 5 million, and then Jordan Rhodes for 8 million, and then Forestieri for whatever on top. And yeah, they're the two. Well, we'll talk about the maths of this. Now, because it's the next question on my list. So the COVID virus hits. Derby just won back-to-back games, 12th spot on 51 points. However, this very strange surge from Luton, Barnsley and Wigan all at the same time, and the tide at the bottom rises, meaning the gap between Derby and the relegation zone is 12 points. We know Birmingham got 9 and then 1 for the flagrant breach, and then a point back to take them back to 9 for cooperating. Sheffield Wednesday are below Derby in this, so you can possibly add another team. Yeah. But are you Derby fans kind of just measuring this gap every week and wondering what Rick Parry and the EFL are going to pull out of the air for the points deduction?
I think there has been an air of that. The good form has come at the right time, because, as you say, you never know what they're going to do. The EFL, the way they've handled this set of cases has been very severe compared to last year's set of cases and whatnot, and obviously QPR as well.
It doesn't bode well with Villa come down either. For them,
well, exactly, yeah. They're in a precarious position anyway. But Yeah, I think there has been an air of looking over their shoulder. Have we got a big enough gap? Because the maximum is 21 points. So as long as you're there or thereabouts, 21 points for the relegation zone, and the season finishes. If it does get deducted, we don't get relegated. If it doesn't, we might have a chance of finishing in the top eight, maybe the playoffs.
Interesting. And just as a nice aside, today, but after we'd arranged this call as well,
Yeah.
the Telegraph have reported that Derby are in quote advanced talks with Michael Dell. Hopefully they've told him about FFP, an
Mm.
American billionaire, over quote a major financial injection. It's not the cure-all thing because you can still only lose 13 million a year, however many
Yeah.
billions you've got. But is this finally Mel Morris's way out now? He seems to have been wanting to sell it for about 5 years, doesn't he? So,
Yeah.
any optimism on Mr. Dell?
I mean, we've had American owners before, and it was probably the period in the club's history where we've been one of the most, well, recent history where we've been one of the most stable. And I think that playoff run in 2013, 2014 came from good recruitment on a budget. And that was under GSE, which who were obviously were the previous owners. Um, and as I say, there were Americans are a bit more commercial than, say, Mel Morris. Um, who obviously put money in to get promotion. So I think if he does come in as a majority shareholder and ends up taking over the club, I think we can start to look toward a more of a, as I say, commercial front. You know, the club needs to be profitable and whatnot. I mean, most sane people think profitable football club won't happen ever, but there's obviously reasons to be optimistic. And to get to that point, you know, you'd hope the playing side of things wouldn't get affected. It might do, it might not do, but I think there's reasons for optimism now, especially with FFP and obviously COVID-19. As I said to you, it was nice not to have a virus-related story come out.
Yeah.
It was a nice break, but yeah, I think Michael Dell coming in would be a breath of fresh air around the club.
Do you think we can divert him towards Ipswich maybe instead of Derby first, for goodness sakes, man. Look, I know we've had sort of big problems at Bury, Southend, Macclesfield, etc. But is there any club, you know, you take Derby's last year of looking a bit dead and buried, ridiculous playoff campaign, losing the final, change of manager, change of squad,
Mm.
sign England's top scorer, sack your captain in a drink driving, and two other players involved in a drink driving disgrace, get charged with FFP, and then the virus. Has any other clubs? There's no point me doing this with any other set of fans, is there? After doing it with a Derby fan.
Yeah, that's an 18-month period like that. I'd be surprised if anyone can rival it. And it would be certainly interesting if they can. But yeah, it's been a massive whirlwind 18 months. It's been weird.
Justin, superb. So can you give us a big plug for the podcast? Because I'm sure there's quite a good amount of my subscribers that probably already listen. But if we can push them in your direction as well, tell us about the podcast generally and the plans during Corona time land.
Yeah, so second tier podcast. It's a championship focused podcast. You know, we feel like there was a bit of a gap for us there. You know, championship clubs. It's one of the most competitive divisions in the world. So why not have a podcast devoted to it? It's a good opportunity, I think, for all supporters in the championship to get a good amount of coverage on their team. In no way are we experts, but you know we certainly try our best, as most fans I think will point out. And if you want a good debate on certain players and their sides, yeah, come and listen to second tier. And obviously in the break at the moment of football, we're doing a few bits and bobs. I think on our last episode we covered your side, Ipswich Town, and their 04-05 team, which was ridiculous.
Oh, I must listen to that then. I haven't heard that one yet. No, glorious. How did they not get promoted?
Exactly. That's pretty much what I asked.
Spoiler, sorry.
Yeah. So yeah, we're going to be covering different squads that have enlightened us over the years with absolute quality. Again, I would say going back to the 04-05 Ipswich side was ridiculously good.
Brilliant. Yeah.
And as well as the good sides, we're going to be looking at the bad sides who might have underwhelmed or been incredibly
Oh,
disappointing or
fantastic.
had a lot of controversies like Derby. So yeah, we've got a few bits coming up and hopefully some interviews with some former players as well.
Oh, that sounds absolutely brilliant. So normally in season time, when would it drop?
Sunday night.
But
Yes.
still, are we still going for Sunday night over this
Yeah,
period?
no,
Oh,
definitely.
good.
We've got more time to do it now, so let's
There
see
you
why
go.
not.
So, in your podcast apps or what do people say wherever you get your podcasts,
Yeah.
second tier podcast. And Justin, where can people find you on Twitter?
Yeah, it's at the Second Tier Podcast. We're on Instagram as well at the Second Tier Pod. So yeah, if you want any sort of championship content, yeah, visit those pages.
So definitely check that out. Justin, thank you for taking
No
time
worries,
out
pleasure.
and talking some Derby with me. Like you say, it's been a whirlwind. It's been very, very crazy, and I'm very, very grateful for you to come on. As ever, follow me on Twitter at Benjamin Bloom. Hit subscribe, ring the bell for notifications. Birdie, birdie, birdie. Support on patreon.com, but only if you've already been to the shops and you have some spare money. Go and buy some food first. Do not give me your money if you're going to go hungry. Right, Justin, say goodbye.
Nice one. Cheers, guys.
And it's a goodbye from me.